Hi everyone, so I'm Brother Kieran. I am a student here in the degree Archival History program. So I'm going to be talking about mental health as well today related to archives, and specifically my belief that archival practice and professional norms as they exist today and as we practice them are deeply connected to and basically help perpetuate structural violence against people with mental illness, connecting to broader state violence, capitalism, things like that. And so I'm also going to suggest that due to these key connections, simple policy changes and reforms of the way we do things within our institutions and within the profession ultimately won't really be enough to completely eliminate the challenges that may face people who both work in our institutions and come in and interact with material as patrons. So basically, I'll try to argue again that archivists have a role to play in broader social justice and anti-oppression movements that will basically start just to think outside our roles as just workers in institutions and as people struggling for something broader than that. So just kind of a background, a lot of this is based on my personal experience with anxiety and depression as a student here and as a worker in archives, and also my background in radical politics and anarchism. So if you don't agree with what I say, that has a lot to do with it. But it's kind of just a reform versus revolution type of question that I'm trying to get to. And I'm focusing mostly on the environments in which archivists work rather than things like classification schemes and other aspects where people associate with mental illness in archives. I'm thinking more of the space, the archivist space, and what that means, the power dynamics of that. And I should also note that I do have a handout and a transcript of this that will eventually go on the website. It's just not there yet with all my sources. So, let's see. So in terms of people who want to get into this field, the structural barriers are significant in many ways for people with mental illness. In order to get a professional position, in most cases it requires a graduate degree. Sometimes a lot of people, at least it was sold to me, that to be competitive you should have two. So there's basically a steep education requirement. And for some people with mental illness, maybe that's not so difficult if they have financial security, a good support system, maybe you can get through, but the more these kind of experiences intersect, the more that this exists and it exists will basically risk marginalizing people and preventing them from getting into the field. So one article that I cited that I actually want to thank Des for this because Des introduced me to this article. April Hathcock's White Librarianship and Blackface, Juristic Issues in OIS, talking about whiteness in the field and basically how there's this white, heterosexual, gender binary type of construction. And she doesn't talk about mental illness per se, but if you throw that in there as well, it kind of relates to this. There's like a norm of what an archivist kind of looks like and acts like, and basically basically if you can't conform to that for whatever reason, some people their mental illness may be invisible, as Hope said, but some people maybe it's not, and for whatever reason if you don't fit the behavior mold, you run the risk of not doing good. So one of the labor practices that impact with mental illness, archivists and students are expected to participate in unpaid internships, take on jobs, if there are jobs when they graduate, they may be underpaid, and basically don't have all the resources that we should. And basically, in this culture of productivity where you have to keep being competitive without always getting something in return for it, I think that's a significant challenge for people who kind of can't stay on top of that for whatever reason. So I guess kind of just these norms within the field that I think are helpful. And I guess this kind of gets into my question of whether or not just changing policies and doing trainings will do things. Another article I looked at was Amanda Galvin's Soliciting Performance, Hiding Bias, Whiteness, and Librarianship, looking at the interview process and the way that what institutions look for is often this whiteness mold, and whether people actively try to get people out of the field, or what they're looking for. It's just kind of this subconscious process that I think, and that kind of relates to, you can train people so much, but if they don't want to do anything about it, they're not going to, and the field isn't really going to change much because of it, or the makeup of the field. But then it's not just students and workers who face challenges along mental health funds and archives. Policies and practices in institutions. I work in an archive where we have kind of intense security procedures where you have to register, show ID, meet face-to-face with the archivist, request materials from the core staffs, work with them, being watched the whole time. And kind of this surveillance that's in archives has kind of been, I really find it problematic, to say the least, because it's kind of, one article I read, Stephen Maynard's Police Archives, kind of connecting the power dynamics in archives to policing. And I think if we're taking cues from the police, who a quarter to a half of fatal shootings by police in, I think, 2015 involved people with mental illness as victims. So I think if we're looking for mental health equity in archives, the policing tactics are not. And we don't have the ability to shoot and kill people, but if we are looking at those parallels, I think those are something that should be doing. So what do we do about this, I guess? Why do I think that it's not enough just to reform? One author that is not in library science or archives, but who's really influential to me is Dean Spade. His book, Normalizing Administrative Violence, Critical Trans Politics, and Limits of Law, kind of looking also at this idea of power, and looking at, he calls it disciplinary power, which is the cultural norms that we participate in, perpetuate in our daily lives, and also population management power, which is kind of the broader structures that we create, whether it's prisons or government programs that you can train people to change things, but unless there's a broad kind of, reconstruction of the way these operate, people are going to be marginalized. And again, Spade doesn't talk specifically about, briefly, but not focused on mental illness, focused on trans politics, but I think these are things that should be considered. So I guess for me, I feel like there really can't be true change under institutions that are still funded by government money and public libraries, archives. It's funded by donors who kind of want things to be a certain way in return, or foundations, nonprofits. To me, looking at people like Jared Drake had a recent piece talking about freedom and archives in the best way. He says, and I would largely agree with this, is if you want to work on freedom, don't be in an institution if you can be, obviously, and if you can't be free of an institution. Because the real work to be done is in places like community archives, where they're directly accountable to their communities, the people who are involved, rather than people who fund them or the government. And just one example of that is the Sexual Minorities Archives in Western Mass. The curator there, Ben Power-Alwyn, who lives in the archives, basically only takes money from small donors and will never donate the materials to a large institution because he believes that they should stay under the control of the LGBTQ community, and if they get some sued in a larger institution, those ways may be lost. And again, since there really isn't much in this idea that I've come across with mental illness, mental health, I guess I'm just kind of drawing from that. If we want people with mental illness to not just be kind of marginalized in the way we do work in archives, I think that community-based approach is really decentralized is really the way to go. Oh, and I also wanted to point a couple of groups that are already doing things like this, like Radical Reference and the Prison Book Program, which are kind of, doing this idea of kind of operating outside of institutions. And I know those aren't exactly what I'm talking about, but I guess just don't think there are people doing this kind of work.
I wanted to thank you for your presentations. I thought the contrast was really nice. I actually work in public libraries, so I think your presentation was really resonant for me. My question is for both of you. I know you presented a lot, and your main focus was on the library patron, or who it is that you're serving library users. For us, working in the public library, we often deal with people coming in with illness, and oftentimes that can lead to a dangerous and threatening situation, which causes a lot of trauma to the staff. So I was wondering if either of you found anything regarding how libraries can improve their treatment of the staff and support them in that kind of direction.
Sure. So I would refer back to the ALA American Libraries Using article. I'll see if I can find the online version and tweet it. But it talks about how the mental health training can ultimately lead to de-escalate a lot of those situations and lead them to having less trauma. There's also another article that's in my work cited called Freak Out or Meltdown, and it's directed for teens dealing with trauma, but it talks about like how to help with somebody after they experience a traumatic event. And I think regardless of what age, I think those tips are very useful for, in total, just helping anybody who has to deal with a situation like that.
Yeah, I don't really think I can confidently add too much just because I didn't really come across and work through that much along those lines, because I was looking mostly in archives, which really doesn't have a lot about those things, because I haven't really seen any literature that is relating to figuring something in archives and mental illness. So I guess I can't really confidently add anything.
If I could just add a side comment. I was wondering then, if there's not too much out there, do you think that it's something that's worth investigating or worth libraries even looking at the mental stability of their staff and supporting them in that way?
I do. I think that, I think the absence of literature to the same extent kind of speaks volumes in a way that, and this is just my opinion, I almost kind of read it that it's not considered is important, because I guess people kind of associate the people who come into archives, at least on the patron side, are kind of like there for a purpose and aren't they're not really as public, even if they are open to public as public libraries. So I think I would say yes. I think that more research should be done in those areas relating to archives, because I can't confidently say that we really know.
And I would just say on that, I couldn't find much on how to help library staff with mental illness, and I think that's something that really needs to be talked about, because there's a large burnout rate in libraries, especially public libraries. So I think that's something that, like, we work so hard to get a degree, and then we burn out really fast a lot of the times. I think it's because we don't get the proper training in certain areas.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So I just have a question. You were talking a little bit about state violence, but I was wondering how we can combat lateral violence in archives, and especially when it comes to microaggressions amongst colleagues, because I know that can be problematic in some cases, especially when it comes to privilege, degrees, whatnot, ethnic backgrounds, gender identities.
That's a good question. I guess I probably haven't given it as much thought as I probably should have. I would say that, I mean, based on, well, I can say coming from my experience, I have a supervisor at my place who thinks that it should be kind of the initiative of the management to kind of, I don't know, I can say, if you have anything to add, I think that.
Yeah, I can't really add anything to that just because I haven't done a lot of research in archives in particular.
Yeah, I guess I don't really have too much to add, just because I haven't really done a lot on so other people may be able to have better answers to that.
Thank you for your presentation. It was really great. I had a question about this mental health training. I was wondering if it would address subjects such as balancing privacy, particularly for teens, and the fact that some people, like school librarians, might be mandated reporters.
Yeah, I just started looking into it because the article came out on Wednesday, and from what I can see, there's two separate different types of training. There's a youth training and there's an adult training. And my guess is that the youth training did a lot more in privacy. I don't know how it pertains to school libraries in particular. I'm planning on going to it soon, once the date becomes available where I'm not working. And then I can definitely give more research. But I think that the website that I have on the paper is the official website for that mental health first aid, and so they have a lot more information on there than I can probably say to it.
Thank you.
I'd like to throw this out for comment to the room, the panelists, and our folks online. I think specifically thinking about how issues like mental health also impact students of color in these programs and practitioners of color, and how there's also issues around microaggressions, and how, if anybody has thoughts on like how to address those sorts of like mental health compounding factors in these environments, or if you have experiences where you've had to navigate that, if anybody has anything to comment on that.
This is not in particular in regards to librarians of color, but I think I might be able to give you some answers. So I work for a public library as well. There is no way to determine dealing, like, when you're interacting with a patron, what type of mental illness that person has. We are not trained professionals. We cannot categorize them. I would say first thing to do is to make sure you are safe, because there is no way you can help someone if you are not in that position to do so. Just like, when you're on an airplane, they tell you, like, make sure you put that thing on before you help the person that's right next to you. And always, our library is lucky enough to have a panic button. And we do yearly have staff development day, in which we push for how to deal with difficult patrons. It's very important to learn how to navigate yourself out of that situation rather than trying to guide them, because you don't know what the push button is. I oftentimes see folks when they say, I understand what you're going through. No, you don't understand what that person is going through. They could, go through so many scenarios in, rapidly, and there is no way for you to get into their heads to learn what they're going through, what makes them aggravated and stuff like that. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question, but I would say as a person who works in the public area, you should really train yourself and your fellow staff on how to remove yourself out of that situation before seeking help. And I would say also have like a code word. Sometimes you can see that situation is going south like really fast. You just need sometimes having like unity or like having a fellow coworker with you also helps you instead of panicking.
So in terms of the students of color and like microaggressions and things like that, in the academic institution that I'm at, we have a lot of Middle Eastern students, and it came to a point to where several of the female students were lodging complaints to people within that department because there was a specific faculty member who was giving them issues constantly, and it was not getting heard. And so they finally were being heard by who's ever over Title IX. And with that, all the faculty who had heard about it and did anything about it were all fired on spot immediately. Due to if you violate Title IX, your institution loses all of their federal funds. So in any situation like that, I definitely suggest having a good relationship with whoever is over Title IX, knowing the process and knowing what you are responsible with reporting, because if you do hear about it, you are responsible. You don't have to technically disclose the student, but it is something that you have to know. So knowing that is a great way to combat it.
So with the students of color, what Des was asking about, I at one point when I first started my research found a statistic that was about persons of color and mental health, and then I couldn't find it again, which makes me question its validity anyways. But the one thing I have noticed is that it's really hard to find YA literature about people of color and mental health. I can find a lot of mental health books, but it was really hard to find any that had diverse characters in it. So I think you can dig deep and find those. It might also be a way because the whole reason you have mental health YA books is to kind of give people an idea that they're not alone. But if all of them just are white teenagers, it's not going to really help other people. And so I think it's really important to try to find a diverse range of mental health YA literature.
Can I just add a comment to that? And I think that what you said is really great, and so it's great to also all of us who have classes about publishers and putting press on publishers or looking for alternatives like ebooks that might be self-published or something like that. You might get a much wider, diverse range of books that you can enter into the collection and make available somehow.
Does anybody else have?
So I think one thing too that we need to recognize, and we just were at a symposium about library services for Indigenous people, but even when it comes to like Indigenous students or people of color that you're interacting with, a lot of people have come from places of trauma or intergenerational trauma, which resonates with them. And often when it comes to mental health, it is triggered by trauma. So I know in public libraries in Canada, we have a lot of individuals who either have a fight or flight reaction to situations that they're in. So if a patron's acting out, it's usually because they're feeling threatened and then they're going to threaten you, or they completely shut down. So I think one thing is to recognize the communities that you're interacting with and to really try to work to build responsible and reciprocal relationships with them, and to not judge, because that's something that's really hard to do. But I think once we learn the legacy of trauma, it's a lot easier to not judge a patron.
All right, thank everyone so much. Thank you to our panelists and presenters.